Thank you very much for joining the session. From my side, very happy to be today with you guys and talk about the mastering tech implementation in Treasury with my colleague, Wouter. I will be the one asking the questions, so I'm probably very happy to do that. And Wouter will be the one, of course, answering them. I am actually leading the pre-sales organization of TIS within EMEA. So I will look for questions in that perspective. I hand over to Wouter for introducing himself.
Welcome all. So I'm Wouter. I am also a colleague of Jacques, of course, and also from Jennifer. I'm leading the professional services team within TIS. I have a background of multiple years in Treasury and also leading team. So I have a background also from Cashforce and far beyond that. Happy to join the session today.
Thank you, Wouter. I would like maybe to start the discussions based on the practical use case. People like to have something they can put into the context. So we are in Treasury, and as it's usual in Treasury, you have one head of Treasury just joined the company, obviously, and he is facing some difficulty because the company is doing actually business everywhere in this world. And next to that, the ERP landscape is very decentralized, and the payments banking relationship are diversified across the globe. And next to that, of course, there are some issues that are related to having a very good cash forecasting online, and of course, risk management related to payment due to the very diversified and decentralized ecosystem. So the new treasurer, who is actually used to work in centralized environment and standardized environment, would like to have the same infrastructure within the new company. So he runs to the CFO. That is how the whole starts. The CFO is looking into the pockets. There are not so much money into, but decide to make some provision to get a budget for the new treasurer to set up this project, because the return on investment is actually a very good case. And next to that, of course, there are IT centralization project running. So not that easy ecosystem. Like as usual, the treasurer run into the market, look for either a consultant to help him selecting the provider, or he is doing the business himself, right? Trying to manage that himself. Now he got the budget. He has discussion with 3, 4, 5 vendors out there and decide to go for one of them. The contract is signed, everything is settled, and people are now expecting something, which is actually the implementation. So that is how it starts, and that is how the discussion will be handed over to you. So Wouter, what do you generally encounter in such cases? What are the documentation or the setting that are important for you, on your view, the customer should be aware of when he starts the project or having the onboarding discussion with you?
Yeah, good question. And let me pull back a little bit before answering. I think as a vendor, right, and also as whatever implementation partner you're looking into, to keep it very general, is quite important, and that's the value that you should drive from both angles, from the client perspective and vendor perspective, is that once you engage into a project with a vendor or with a third party, it is a very mindset that you need to have from both angles to operate as one team. That's one. So we are indeed, or you have a vendor-client relationship that will remain, but with the same goal, same mission, to deliver the utmost valuable at the earliest time. So that is our goal, right? That is always my mission for the team as well. We operate as one team. That's important. Second, to deliver with success every project is transparency. We need to strive for transparency. If there is a question, if there is a concern, this has to be raised and answered, of course. So transparency is a given. We need to provide that. And third of all, I think that speaks for everything, because everything, you mentioned it, the cost of an implementation in any case is extensive, right? There's always budget related, internal, external. What we need to deliver, or what you always need to deliver, is quality. And that counts for both ends, right? It counts from a data perspective, but also from an application perspective. So what we strive for in a team is transparency, quality is maybe on top, and one team, same mission, same goal to deliver it. Which brings me then, of course, to your question, providing on, okay, what do we need, right? What is important for us to get started on this? Well, it starts off, we define the team. As a client, but also on a vendor perspective, we need to be able to define the team and a good fit. And a good fit means expertise, personalities, market. We evaluate everything, and that's where pre-sales or sales or whatever party comes into the picture very early. And every vendor should engage internally quite fast, with giving also that internal transparency on, okay, what is needed for the client, what is his ERP, what is driving him, what is the mission, what is the background of a client. Everything is important to define the team. Once you define the team, we, of course, as a vendor, we don't want to go blind into a client call. And we always like to have the utmost details. It starts with the contract, I know, but an internal handover is always preferable. This is all in the background. So this is basically the team that has been established, that gets to know the use case. I will come to that, I hope, later with maybe some other questions from you. But the use case is important. What is the solution? What is the problem? What is the problem statement? This is all part of an internal handover, which systems, whatever, everything needs to be on the table before we engage, or client or vendors engage with clients. This is the next step you have. I can call it a pre-call, if you can call it that one, and that is a very informal call. Project manager to project manager, including sponsor. Why not? Everybody's in that call, and they talk about the next steps. Who will be the team? What is the mission? Where do we want to land? Am I right? Is this my understanding, right? To have a good understanding of what the mission is, before just engaging into a huge call with multiple people, where then you maybe put something on a slide or something you think is set in stone, which is maybe not. And then that is part of the kickoff call. The kickoff call for me is just a prerequisite. You can't do a good project without this. And in this kickoff call, it's quite broad, but already defined up front, looking into all kinds of aspects. If you think about the project setup, do we have the right understanding? What is the use case? What is your problem? And the main purpose is not to get all clarity on all those questions. The main purpose is exactly point number one, which I pointed out, right? We operate as one team. Clear understanding, who does what? Am I right that this is the focus? What is the aim and what is driving that aim? Is it technology driven? Is it risk driven? It can be multiple drivers that lead towards a specific goal in a specific time. In that kickoff call, you will not go to the nitty-gritty immediately, but the outcome of such a kickoff call, of course, is not to sit back and relax. The call is exactly to pinpoint to the next deliverables, right? In an example is, I know that if you look at resources, right, you have your IT resources, business resources. In a SaaS solution, which is kind of specific, you need streamlined processes, right? It's very agile, quite deliverable. And what the outcome of such a meeting is, understanding, but also the next steps, getting those calls set up, the technical calls, but also the business calls. Everybody wants to deep dive and wants to get it done as far as possible, and that's the result of that call.
So if I well understood you, that means you are expecting first to build a team, and the team to be clear, directed, minded into one goal, and this goal is obviously the target infrastructure. That's how the project will look like. That need to be defined and be very clear from the beginning for all. And also the whole landscape, right? That's what you're talking about. What is the landscape? Where are the challenges or the perception that challenges will actually be to be addressed in the future? So those identifying the challenges, those talking about the target infrastructure, or those even engaging in the project are part of the team. So how do you, or what do you say to our auditor here and people listening to us, asking to you what is the perfect team configuration for steering challenging global projects?
Yeah, the perfect team. That's the. If I can answer this one, I will be happy. The perfect team indeed consists out of, unfortunately, multiple people. I mentioned already we work agile, and we want to strive that as well. We don't want to. Well, we nor any vendor nor any corporate wants to have resources available for no reason. Right? Agile is, or hybrid, whatever you want to call it, is actually a good model to do this. Right? And this is what we promote, which means that typically with a SaaS solution or an ERP solution, you engage resources when required. If you set up a system, you go technical, right? You don't need all the technical expertise immediately in a project. And you can really define that upfront and reserve resources. So in that team, you have resources come and go, right? from a technical, but also from a business perspective, depending on what kind of implementation you are doing. Experts come and go. There's only one caveat here, and you need to have a key team, right? In every vendor implementation, the key team is consisting out of the key user. I will come to that one as well. The key team is, of course, driving the project. And in driving a project, there are a few things you need to keep in mind. If it depends on the size of the company, if it's a global approach versus more local approach, you will need to have resources that own the platform. And later on, if you go to a support mode, it will make more and more sense why you want to have a set of key users with SMEs, the experts of a platform in place. That's the team that stays on and also needs to have the Joker card, right, where they can make decisions. And you need to have people that have that can make without any doubt decisions based on actual facts. So that is the key team. We push people really into making those decisions and that they can make them themselves, because otherwise you lose again traction. Of course, if you look at the total picture, and I'll come to that, is you have your key team, you have your IT resources when needed. You have, if it's decentralized, also decentralized teams. But then, in my opinion, the decisions need to be made centralized. You want to have a global picture, not to come into special scenarios. And we always try to avoid them. Special scenarios based on region, based on country, based on, you want to have them as low as possible. Do I believe that it's not that it will never happen? No, I don't believe so. There's always the exception. But you want to keep like a global template, if I can call it that. So you have your key team, you have your resources that come in when needed, right? Good planning. And then next of all, we all know that we can't make all the decisions ourselves, or we will face maybe not even issues, but just decisions that are out of the team's span, right? Example is, all of a sudden there is an ERP migration. This can have an impact on your plan, this can have an impact on resources, this can have an impact on everything. Then you go to a more strategic, right, level, which is your sponsor, and you go up. So I always like to have steerco sponsor moments as well, even if things are going well. I think this is the best meeting you can have, right? Where you can have 20 minutes with your sponsors, with your key stakeholders, and you just go through the plan, the budget, everything is happy, we're on track, everybody, that's fine, right? But there will be a moment, well, let's hope not, but in many cases, there will be a moment where there is a decision, right? All of a sudden something changed where you need to have like, you have to deviate from the original path, or an ad hoc moment where you need like, okay, we're doing A, are we going to drop it? We have a resource, what do we do? This is where you need your sponsor, right? They need to have that commitment as well to make that shift for the team. So that is very important. So the team is quite broad. Sponsors, they also are like on a monthly basis. You define that also during your kickoff. Tactical, that's not part of the team itself, but this is for me the ideal team, and this is how vendors also operate, right? From a client perspective, but also from a vendor perspective, you should do the same, and you should operate in the same way. Make sure that you have the right resources available. Come and go, right? If you look at multiple vendors, you see a small team, but if you then look behind the scenes, you see that product is there, that the sponsors is there, that maybe relationship managers are there, even sales, right? Just pops in again, why not? Just to have fast-paced, fast feedback and assuring that quality, right? And transparency.
So to sum up again on these parts, you say you don't want to go into title, you don't want to go into background of the team. You need agile team. Agility is what is important because you believe on the back there's a huge corporate supporting the project, and therefore who is actually on the front should only be somebody who can manage the flow of information and also take decisions. So that was very important for you. So, but you said something that actually was surprising to me. It was related to special settings, special project. It should not be too special. But let's us go back to the use case, and we have this treasurer doing business worldwide. He's having a lot of banks, a lot of ERP systems. So he is bothered how to start the project because obviously he cannot do everything at the same time, and he wants, of course, to have a kind of very manageable scope, right? Where he can see the success also very fast. So the methodology is at the heart of the discussion that you might have with within the project. So how will you actually, for this specific use case, support the clients to define the right scope to start with, or the way he should actually manage the project? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So the reason that a client is looking for a solution can have multiple angles. It can have an angle of need, can have an angle of risk, but there's always a use case or a as is versus to be. Very general, if you go on the market, and we do it ourselves, right? If we go on the market and we want to have a solution, there is a reason for it. And the reason is not only important to drive the approach, because that's the question, right? How can we come to a good approach, or how do you come together with a good approach in bringing value, right? The value quite fast. And that can, like I said, there are multiple angles. You can put it on an axis. That's also how we do it, right? In driving, like, okay, what is the approach? How are we going to a certain result within a certain time with a certain quality? And that is the driver behind it. It can have a risk driver. It can have a speed driver, right? Look at, I think multiple clients, and probably on the call as well, are facing a need versus internal items that need to happen, right? They need to migrate, they need to upscale. There's a new ERP. It's very IT driven. There is a risk factor. Cybersecurity is hot on the plate. This has an impact on, is one driver of the value, right? Where they want to make sure that the solution or the value or the solution is brought to them. with making sure, of course, that they can still focus on the other stuff. These are all drivers that can lead to something. And we're end of year. Every company now does a budgeting exercise. This can be a driver. Right? This can be a driver to deliver fast the added value. As you know, every vendor has multiple packages, multiple modules, whatever they can deliver. It's up to us to define together with the client what brings the utmost value as fast as possible. You made the example of, for example, banking, right? So one of the things that is important, if you take this example, is we need to understand, and I hope we already understand quite fast, the approach, right? It's a global entity, you're worldwide, you have banks everywhere. What is the best approach to bring that value fast in teaming up? And it can be a regional approach, but it can, for example, also be a banking approach, right? Regional, just to explain it a little bit, regional meaning you're looking at Europe. Or if you're a US client, you probably look at US. This is your main. It's not as such value driven in monetization in this case. Then you would go for a banking approach. Banking approach is more like, okay, you take your biggest bank, most transactions, most money goes through it, and then you will take that approach. What we see is typically number one is preference, right? But this is an example that you need to get clarity on, right? What is the driver? Yeah.
So would you actually say, if because you say, okay, the driver of the project, that is extremely important, why are we doing this project? Let us assume in the case of the treasurer, he do not have any visibility very fast. You want to have it faster, right? Because those entities have to report that manually and so on in order for him to get this, and it's probably late always for decision making. And he wants now to have this visibility very fast. So that is the value that he can get very fast. What will be the case now for you? Would that be regional? Would that be per main banks, transaction banks, or whatsoever? So for this specific case, how can value be brought through project implementation fast?
Yeah, and that's in this example, this is where the vendor plays a big role. I never underestimate the vendor role, right? Vendors have quite some experience, and I'm talking very general, right? So I don't think that they're vendors with only one client. I hope not. I think vendors have, in many cases, hundreds of clients. So what vendors should do is learn from that. And in that case, learn from, first of all, the implementation, but second of all, looking at relationships, at approaches, what failed, what went good in the past, and make a proposal. In this case, for example, depending on the landscape, depending on what we learned, of course, if it's, and let's take an example of a European company or a US company, we can definitely make a proposal and say, like, look, this is your landscape, right? We have experience in A, B, and C. We would approach it like this and this and this because of that reason, because you will have quite value already fast. It's also up to a vendor, in my opinion, to show that value. Right? A vendor should be able to literally put on an overview and say, like, look, if you take approach one with bank, I know you have these banks, you will have value already after this amount of time, and this will be your value. So that leaves only a small piece of added value with the remaining banks, as an example. You can combine, right? It depends again on the landscape. It's not as such black and white with regional, right? If you have only a few banks, like we sometimes see with corporates, you have that dual approach where you do it regional, looking into a focus on, for example, Europe, but then a second focus on your banking landscape. Like I said, for us, it's quite important, the combination of scope and time, value, user friendliness, and that goes hand in hand, right? The more scope you have, the approach can differ. The more scope means potentially more banks, more entities, more regions. But it's up to us as a team to define that best next step to bring added value. That's up to the vendor to also push, of course, added value fast, right? That there is to lower risk and to bring a solution.
Great. So that means, again, I have the feeling that you are trying to keep it general anyway. But I understand the point that you try to make, because like you say, if the customer actually have a big bank, he is doing business with this bank worldwide. So, and the most transactions are running through these banks, it might be actually very important to go first with this bank to get visibility, which is not the case if the customer have different bank in the region, like in the US, and want the most of the transactions are in the US, then he might go regional first. So there is no such a kind of best case you can portray here, but it really depends on the use case or on the way the business is actually organized. That's what you try to make here. So driver of the project. Let's be a little bit more general. Can you maybe provide 5 driver of project that you have been experiencing in the last years, main driver of project in Treasury?
What do you mean driver? Use cases?
Yes. Why did you experience customer coming to do project and they tell you, okay, we want to onboard that is the driver of this project so far?
Yeah, good one. Good question. So on top of my head, right, and now I need to go back, clients always, one of the drivers is actually risk. Risk because of old tooling. That's one of them. I think we all know it's not old, we still use it, right? Excel. But I think a lot of clients go on the market because of an getting out of hand Excel sheet, right? And it's bound to explode, or there's one person that can maintain it. There's so much data in there that they are scared to maintain it. That is, for example, one of the drivers that can happen. One is growing factor. Clients we see a lot of them growing tremendously fast, which is also, of course, blocking them from a technical perspective. And where vendors like ourselves can jump in, right? We can make their life easier. And that's the whole mission, right? Reduce that risk, whatever that is, and also make the life easier. And making it easier is not only, and sometimes we tend to forget from a business perspective, but I always point out to the technical aspect as well. One of the, maybe a good example is let's look at an ERP migration, right? So I think a lot of clients are currently moving to an S4. If they have an SAP ECC, they go to an S4. And this is maybe a good thing, is that this, of course, comes with a cost, lots of resources, lots of time. They want to make sure that this happens good and in a good way, maintained fast and good. And a very big aspect is actually the IT driver. Right? Why do you do this? One of the things that we cannot forget as well, apart from ERP migration, where you have a SaaS solution, and I'm talking very general again, is from an IT perspective, this makes life easy. Right? You have your connections, your data needs to flow in, but from a platform perspective, you don't need to worry about upgrades. Right? You don't need to worry about migrations or new versions. That's all up to the vendors, right? So you will grow together with the platform, and from an IT perspective, you are limited in resources. I'm not saying that there is none, right? There's always an IT resource because in a couple of years, things evolve, right? Look at APIs, for example, that changes, right? Where you can make better use of the platform. Vendors evolve, and then also are going to ask, like, hey, currently you're doing X, Y, Z to send us your data, for example. We actually have a better way, or a more convenient way, or a less impact for your IT resources way. So platforms are evolving. But this is, for me, always one of the drivers that you cannot forget, right? And that can plead for to go on the market. I talked about risk, right? Risk is not only an Excel file. Risk is going beyond, right? You made the example of banking and payments. Well, if you are not responsible, banks are evolving, formats are evolving or changing. Banks make changes, connections change. This can also be a driver, right? Where you don't want to spend your own precious time in creating formats, in talking to banks, in making sure that you're future-proof. That can also definitely be a driver to go onto the market.
Okay, so which means now we have a very good view on that part, and now the project is going on, right? You decide to push for the project, and the resources internally are, in the case of SAP migration, like you say, very, very limited. And here we are in the Treasury implementation project. So there's this discussion out there always when you have customer or prospect you deal with. They will always say, probably also this treasurer, I don't want it to become an IT project. So what do you say about that?
I would say yes. We also don't want this, right? It's like I said, like all applications, data is important. We get quite some questions on data possibilities of a platform. There's always the driver, but the driver is also for all vendors, and including us, is to limit that time for IT. For example, if we need a data set, we will cater for the utmost to deliver the correct data set as fast as possible. Also, we jump in where needed, we validate, we test, we make sure everything runs smooth. Again, to set the resources free, to get them only in when needed and set them free when we don't need them. That's the ideal world. And this is just driving it, right? If we can do it without IT sources, no. I think then we are limited to our capabilities, depending on the module, depending on the platform. We will always need them, but we strive to get the resources as low as possible. And the way that we do it, or that vendors should do it, is provide the specs as clear as possible. If there is new functionality or other ways in doing it, they should also provide it, right? I talked about APIs. This is an example, right? From an SFTP evolving to an API, for example. That can be one of them. But then looking at a planning perspective, because I know that indeed in many companies, this is the struggle, right? When do we need which IT resource? This comes down to planning. This comes also down to the approach. We talked about regional versus banking approach. Let's take that example. If you take a regional approach and you're like a global company, potentially you will have multiple ERP systems. From a regional perspective, you can also plan, of course, resources to that specific ERP system. We see that a lot, right? Where you see the EMEA system is running here, you engage the IT resources, you get it up and running, you do the necessary looking into setting up the system, configuring the system, et voila, phase one is done. In the meantime, you start already with your second set of IT resources to work on your second system, which is maybe based in US. They can hopefully learn, depending on the landscape of ERPs. Multiple clients have, for example, multiple instances of SAP. Well, it's rinse and repeat. That's how we call it. They can learn from the other team. They take it, they implement it, and move on to the next one. And this is how you can lower that cadence.
So, which is actually very interesting. But at the end of the day, you probably have to manage knowledge too, right? Or if those involved in the project need to be more knowledgeable into the platform or the ERP system they want to get into, you have to transfer this knowledge by way of trainings or support. How do you manage those very important expectations of the customer in general, like training and support? Now I'm asking really on your own experience, not a broader experience.
Yeah.
What are your
the advice there is I mentioned hybrid model and agile model. Training and testing we do in the same way. And let me focus on training. A simple example is the following. You signed the contract, right? We were there. One of the kickoff items actually is as well, like, here is your platform, right? After the kickoff meeting, you will see it's not an empty box. There is not much in there yet, right? The purpose is to fill the box. And one of the things that happens immediately there is you will get a user account and you will already be trained on how do you actually manage your user management. And this is the first step. We as a vendor, we strive to hand over the full application. That's a perfect world where the users or the client is just owning the system, right? This is already a first indication. We spin off the tenant, that's up to us. And then as a next step, we will open it, we will show it, and we already train you. And this is the sequence, this is the first step, right? User management, you have your tenant, you own it, you can give access, remove access, play with access. And then you go into the next sequence. You asked, like, how do you do it? Well, we have working packages, that's how we call it. Also defined then who needs to be involved when. One of the next steps is, for example, master data. We will sit down together with the client. We call it scoping. We will scope out, okay, what do we need, right? Well, how do we set up your master data? Which are your entities, your bank accounts, the whole stuff. Already then we will start it off, right? We like to give a little bit of insights in the box, but at the same time, we will already train the client and say, like, look, this is how you set it up. This is your master data. This is how you feed it into your system. This is how you transform it to production. Every little step will be trained, right? I mentioned hybrid versus agile, actually very agile. You deliver something, we work on something, and it's actually, the definition of agile is, can we test it? Is it small or big enough, small, big enough to be able to test it? Et voila. So the answer is yes. You are able to set up your master account or your master data, your bank accounts, and you immediately see the result in the system. It's configuration, it is set up. And we continue, right? Looking at banking, we will set up the first bank. Every little step that we do will be immediately with a training attached to it. So we can hand it over and users can just use the system and also learn from the system and expand the system on their own.
Great. That means the topic related to training support is also something that you say must be part of a project, a tech project in Treasury.
Yeah.
So that is independent of the background of the team, or do you actually provide information based on that background?
Yeah, maybe to interrupt you immediately, right? I mentioned in the beginning the key users. Voila, here's where the key users already play a big role, right? These are the people, and it doesn't have to be regional, right? You can have key users all over the planet, but these are the people that we like to have in the project team as owners or key users of the platform. And you mentioned support. If you allow me, I will already jump into the support kind of things, is because what we do have, or what vendors have, is of course a support team. So after go live, you will be handed over to our support team. And of course, I call it the tunnel, right? The funnel approach is we have multiple clients with hundreds of users. That doesn't mean they're the key users. we of course can open the box of support, which means they get an access to the support desk, they can create tickets. No problem there. But what I'm getting to is, if you have a set of key users, like 1, 2, 3 per region, this is perfect, right? Because that means that your 200 users go to the key users with a potential question, with an issue, with something that has to change. The key users can absorb it, look into it, give feedback in many cases, like, yeah, let me do it, or just check here, or I think you missed X. If, of course, the key user is not able to provide fast feedback, yeah, then those users will log a ticket with us, and then we will take it forward and get back. This is a super cool role for a key user, right? You are the expert, and you are the link between the vendor support organization and a huge set of users within the organization.
So thank you, Wouter. I would like to have to ask one important question, which is related to the money, right? It's funny to do projects, but of course, like I said at the beginning, the CFO has been providing you with a limited resources, and therefore the pocket is actually important. That means actually managing the cash at hand is extremely important for a project, right? Especially when it comes to treasury project. We all know that most of the treasurer doesn't have the budget themselves, and they have to run to the CFO. So how do you support or make sure or ascertain that the project remain into the scope that have been defined and the budget will be met? Is it even possible to have a project where the budget will be made like it was planned?
Excellent question. Very difficult question as well. Thanks, Jacques. Let me put it back to where it all starts. One of the things is I told everybody that we learn, right? We have not one client, we have multiple clients, and they all have different flavors. But what we try to capture from a vendor perspective is, where do we spend our time? Do we spend it wisely? Where do we bring added value? So we measure this, and this is important, right? It's important that we measure valuable time. We don't want to overcharge clients. We don't want to do this. And this is an exercise that we do continuously. And also, and then your job comes in, right? Is also when you are in conversations with the clients, or when the contract needs to be set, is we always try to give an utmost correct number, right? If it's not out of the blue, right? We don't make up a number. We are also engaged in defining that number, in defining, like, okay, this is the scope, this is what we need to reach, this is the stretch can be, right? If the client says, like, look, we're going to focus on Europe now, and next year it will be EMEA or US. We also have some migrations going on. It all plays a role. And what we don't want, what we hate as a team actually, is spend all the money and ask for more. We don't like this. This is time consuming as well, and we would like to avoid this. The way that we then do it as a team is we, of course, track all time. That's for certain. But we also communicate. I mentioned the steerco. This is typically a moment that is used to share the highlights on the budget. If no steerco is there, there's also other ways that we communicate it. So we track time, and track time in a sense of, first of all, where are we? And I think an alarm goes off at 90% of budget. Then we deep dive into, okay, but how much time do we actually need to fully deliver, or to the utmost, the project? If we think that we will not manage it, then we have that, and that's that transparency, right? Then we will have that call and say, like, look, A, B, and C. There are always different drivers. The driver can also be, we engaged more, right? We have clients that really ask us, like, hey, can you also step in with internal documentation? We like to provide input, but it happens, right? Where there's really a need, where we have to step in. Also testing, right? So resources at the client side, for some reasons, right? Look at resources occupied somewhere else. They want to make progress on the project. Can you help us with testing? Yes, we can, right? Then the transparency comes back. If we do this, we try to be as open as possible and say, like, look, yes, we can do this, or yeah, but let's be careful, right? Because we will consume budget. The more transparent we are on all those steps, we also see that clients really understand that we need an additional amount of days, because we can literally explain the reasons behind it. Did we do more testing? There was a migration, scope changed. Complexity, I don't know what, right? An acquisition, for example, an acquisition dropped in.
Maybe I don't want to, because the discussion is very interesting, but I have to keep into the time. And
okay, sorry.
I would like the audience
to
in
also short, yes, we keep track and we communicate.
Exactly. So I want also the audience to ask a few questions, but let us just sum up. You say from the beginning that the project management is based on the same goal. So you need driver to understand where the project should go, what is the target of the project, and then you need a team where you also have clear understanding of the driver of the project, clear understanding on decision maker in the project and how the project will be set up. You need to have a clear methodology that you will discuss with the prospect or the customer in order to get the project successful. And of course, managing resources and managing expectation within the training, because you obviously want to train the trainer and support them. But last but not least, do not forget the financial means. So that is actually what we went through yet. So just in one sentences, how is the customer journey look like from your experience? Just one sentences before we hand over again to the question of the audience.
Okay, so in short, we don't let go the client, right? The client journey is until actually you guys and full life cycle. And we do that continuously. I mentioned I'm responsible for the professional services team. We are driving the full client journey, and meaning we are responsible from onboarding up to support. Is all within one organization or within one team.
But that is not, it's obviously not what you see everywhere, right? There might be some organization where there's a link, a fair trends, the difference between the support, the onboarding, and other direction. But that may be.
That's maybe another call, Jacques, right? Because then you can look at what are the best practices for a vendor or in general for an organization, right? Also in-house. Right?
Yeah.
In-house. Very. We can also talk about that one. Yeah.
Let me hand over. The topic is very interesting, but we have just 10 minutes remaining. And let me hand over again to Jane. If there are any questions from the audience, you can take over to answer.
Thank you so much, Jacques. We did have a couple of questions come in from the audience. The first one came in from Rebecca. How do you recommend prioritizing IT resources during a project? We'd like to take that.
Yeah, we briefly touched upon this one already, but crucial in this way is planning, right? And what we think to know, and I think we have a good knowledge of that, is in planning resources, and it's not only IT, you need to have like a good plan, right? If you decide on an approach, you know how to handle it. You know the master data, how far are you going, scoping, right? Blueprinting, if you want to call it. And you can push it that far. And you can plan quite well, because then you know, for example, you have an IT integration XYZ. And if you look at, I think I can make it more broader for all vendors. In a typical SaaS solution, you see a peak in the beginning, because then you have your connections, your SSO, all that kind of stuff, right? That needs to your SFTP, a very technical infra-related resource needs to be available. Then you go into the ERP, potentially another ERP, right? But you can plan this very carefully. You can really plan this good.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Wouter. The next question comes in from Laurent, and these questions roll in throughout the presentation, so sorry if they're a little bit, you covered them. What is more successful, in-house implementations or outsourced?
Yeah, I already opened the box, right, Jack? I said, like, we can talk about in-house. Sorry for that. Well, I can speak, now I need to speak from us, right? We believe in in-house, right? We have our organization, and we like to do this, and we like to continue. It will not change on that. Also, from a support perspective as well, it pays off, right? It pays off on quality, it pays off on knowledge inside of our organization. And I like to believe the same for clients. But do I believe that you can't outsource it from a client perspective? No, right? You see that many experts sometimes are brought in-house for a specific task and then set free, which works nice. But then again, you come to the point, how then do we make sure that we have the right IT sources? And then planning is crucial. Because what a typical, you have to go onto the market, they say, like, yeah, we can do it, this is our cost. When do you want us to start? And then the ticker goes, right? So then you need to make sure that your plan is set, the resource can start and finish within that time frame, because otherwise you come into, you know the drill, right? You come into new conversations about resource availability, also the cost increases. So planning is crucial.
So let me maybe jump again, because the topic is extremely interesting. So what you try to say is that in-house is something that is great, at least from the vendor perspective, because you can then support best, because you know the solution that you propose, and you can handle pitfall actually during the project and also during the support. But the reality look completely different when we look out there on the Treasury side. And let us go back to our use case. This guy is new and doesn't have all these resources in-house. And he would like maybe to have some support from consultancies. Is it something that you say it makes sense? That is one question. And the other question is, what if actually the customer, which is actually a big customer, he come to you guys and say, I want a consultancy to support you? Yeah. How do you handle those two use cases?
Yeah. So we do have quite some partnerships as well. With external parties, and that we often consult on, right? We also engage with clients from that perspective, and I know that clients do the same, and they can bring expertise. Take the example of the Excel, right? You have your Excel, which is a risk, and you want to step away from it. You can go onto the market, you can come literally to us. We will try to find that solution or make it fit, or see if our solution brings exactly your solution or the answer, and you want to have that condensed. What we also see is that a third party or a external consultancy can help from both angles, can help to streamline your process internally, make sure that everything runs smooth and you're not going too far, right? Because I think we all know that if you have an Excel and you go onto the market, the world opens, right? We didn't talk about change management, but this is an important piece of an implementation as well. I talked about 200 users, I talked about key users. Another driver for key users is change management. Change management is time consuming, and change is always difficult, right? External parties can also help, right? They know what an end scope can be, but can limit the focus on, but this will already bring you added value. And they can, of course, assist, right? Depending on the topic, they can definitely have added value in-house. And like I said, we also do it, right? If a client is having questions, is like, okay, I don't know how to approach this. Okay, I will be a fool not to tell you that we also engage sometimes third parties, right? Because they have the expertise. We also, as a vendor, you need to step sometimes back, right? If in defining a process, yes, we can. But literally deep diving into something, then we call it more consultancy, and that's where I would engage with a third party, and then of course bring both worlds together, and they can take it forward. And of course we stay engaged to make sure that everything is aligned in that path.
So engagement and integrating the third-party agility is actually what makes that best. But of course, if you have in-house of the resources, at least from the solution side, it makes more sense from your point of view. Sorry for jumping into. I would hand over again to Jen if there are any questions from the audience.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. The last question comes in from Ashley. How do you recommend managing a project pivot during an implementation? For example, if an acquisition happens mid-project rollout.
Okay. This is an interesting one. Let's take the example of an acquisition, or let's take it broader, right? It would not be the first time that we engage with a project and where an initial in-house project should have been finished before we start is still ongoing, right? Or an acquisition, or a new ERP, or something happens, right? This is something that we need to be flexible in, and this is where your team jumps in, right? There's always a surprise, and let's take the acquisition surprise. Many clients, this is not as transparent with the project team or maybe the full team, because it's typically a bit silent in the background handled, and then all of a sudden things need to move. The two angles of an acquisition, in my opinion, first is resource availability. What we see with an acquisition, or what we know from acquisitions, is that it consumes resources in an organization, in the client, so it will have an impact on your timeline potentially. Most clients are quite transparent on that one. So then you have, let's start with this one. So first of all, resource availability because of the acquisition. Do we boost up, depending on where we are, our engagement with the client, right? So that there is progress and we can still deliver. That's a conversation. Second is, of course, the real acquisition, right? New entities, new banks, new scope, new goals, new missions, new value. Transparency. We need to align on this and make sure that it fits at the right time. And that's the crux, right? That's the thing that we need to make sure, right? What is the impact of this acquisition? And it can be a small impact, but it can be a huge impact. And the huge impact can be, and we're always talking about a client buying or acquiring another entity, but it can also be the other way around, where the client is bought by another. We've seen that as well. And then you talk about on a different layer, right? This can have an impact on, for example, your master data, your full setup. Right? What happens to the bank accounts? What happens to, we talk about forecasting, cash management, what happens to the team? So this is something that we like to believe we cater for quite well, and quite straightforward. I didn't see any big delays from that angle, but it all comes down to timing again, right? When is it going to happen? What is the impact? And you need to look at the broader picture. Resources, ERPs, who acquires who, what is the impact on the team or the end consumer? Does it change maybe the priority list? We talked about regional versus banking. Do we now need to focus on US instead of Europe, right? It can have an impact. Does it mean delays? No, it's a shift in priorities.
So
I need to be cautious on time.
Exactly. So thanks a lot for all those insights that you provide into the tech implementation project. From my side, already, thank you for joining this session today.